Well, hi everybody. My name is Patrick Riecke, and I'm the Director of Chaplaincy for Parkview Health in Northern Indiana. I'm also the author of a couple books. The first one called How to Talk with Sick, Dying, and Grieving People, and the second is 101 Ways to Find Meaning in the Midst of Suffering. So we're going to go through a few modules here that are going to help you to find meaning in suffering and support people as they're going through difficult times. We're going to talk about some really concrete hospital visitation tips and best practices that we found in our team of a couple dozen chaplains and doing this all day, every day, around the clock. And then we're also going to talk a little bit about advanced care planning. And if you haven't had an experience with advanced care planning yet, it's taking time with people to talk about what's really important to them as they face their own mortality. So whether through a chronic or terminal illness, or even as they approach the end of life, we're going to get really specific about some of those tools. So as you hear me talk about this, I've learned a lot about it. I've got a lot of things to share, but let me tell you about the day that I realized that this kind of conversation was a little bit different than everything else I did when I was in ministry. So when I was young and I was in youth ministry, I was a part of a congregation that had a multi-staff. We had several of us that were part of the pastoral staff. And as a part of that, I had a hospital day. That meant that on Thursdays, whoever from our congregation was in the hospital, it was my responsibility as the 20-something youth minister to go and visit them. And I would love to tell you at this point that I looked forward to those visits and I just treasured the time I was able to spend with those patients in the hospital, but that would be a lie. I didn't look forward to those times. I sort of dreaded it. After all, I was young and I was working with people who were even younger than me, and so usually it wasn't the people that I knew that were in the hospital. And so one particular day, I was trying to busy myself with everything else and almost ignore the fact that it was my hospital day and I was supposed to go visit whoever was in the hospital. But eventually I went out into our work area where we had a large dry erase board, and on that dry erase board we would write out the names of any of our congregants who were in the hospital. And I'll be honest, I was expecting and hoping that there would be exactly 0 names on the whiteboard that day. But when I stepped out into the hall, I realized and encountered exactly one name that was on the whiteboard. The name was Gladys, and she was listed under Parkview Hospital, the hospital that I would later end up working for as a chaplain. And so I mustered my strength up to leave the work that I was doing at the office, and I decided I'd better head on down to the hospital to visit Gladys. And I'll be honest, I was thinking a little bit more about hitting the coffee cart at the hospital on my way out than I was about the best practices of how to care for Gladys when I went up to her room. So I got up to her room, and all I knew from the board was it said what hospital she was in, her name was Gladys, and then it had one little phrase, broken hip. And to a 20-something youth minister, I thought, well, that's sort of stereotypical, right? Older woman falls, breaks hip. And so I went into it thinking, well, broken hip is serious, but it's not life or death. I've broken bones before. It's not all that bad. But I went into her room, and as I came around to where I could see her, and she didn't have any family visiting at the time, so I came around into her line of sight, and I could see that Gladys was crying. So I did the only thing I knew how to do. I pulled up a chair next to her, and I sat down, and I looked in her face. I introduced myself because we didn't know each other. I told her that Pastor Bob had sent me because she knew him. She nodded and seemed to accept the fact that I was there to visit. I was very uncomfortable. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know how to address the fact that she was clearly in a lot of pain and that she was crying and at a point of crisis. And so I asked the only question I could think of to ask, and the one that I'd asked in most of these visits up to that point, Gladys, how can I be praying for you? And I thought that's a good question for a pastor to ask in these difficult situations. And through her tears, Gladys looked up at me and she said, Sonny, just pray that I go be with Jesus. Go be with Jesus? But you just broke your hip. My mind was reeling. How could she be thinking about wanting to die after she'd broken her hip? Well, I prayed for her. I can guarantee I did not pray that she died. I'm not sure what I did, but I stumbled through some prayers, excused myself, and it was clear to me that I really probably hadn't helped Gladys very much that day. And so I realized at that point I need different resources. I need different tools on my tool belt when I walk into these situations where things are so difficult. And so much of what you're going to hear me say in the modules and the rest of this course is going to sound like I've got this figured out and I've got a lot of these pieces nailed down. But you need to know that that's the day that I realized there's a whole world of understanding how to help people in these moments of crisis. So if you've had that experience, if you felt that moment of weakness, if I don't know what to say, I don't know how to interact with this person, stay tuned. These next modules are going to help you have the confidence you need to be able to really help people in moments of crisis.